My brother ordered a second glass of champagne and made sure I watched him drink it. He held the flute at exactly the angle where the light caught it, took a slow sip, and exhaled with the theatrical satisfaction of a man who believed luxury was a personality trait. "This is why you work hard," he said, gesturing at the first-class lounge around us. Leather chairs, complimentary bar, actual food, not whatever they serve in economy. He looked at me with the expression he'd been perfecting since childhood, the one that mixed affection with pity in proportions that made both useless. "No offense, May, but you really don't belong here." He said it casually, like a weather observation, like pointing out that it was raining and I'd forgotten an umbrella. A statement of fact about the natural order of things. My name is May Chen. I'm 33 years old, and I was sitting in the first-class lounge at JFK International Airport on the day after Christmas, wearing a plain black hoodie, leggings, and sneakers, holding a boarding pass that my brother assumed I'd somehow scammed my way into. I hadn't scammed anything. My mother had upgraded my ticket as a Christmas gift because she felt sorry for me, which was arguably worse. Our family was flying to Miami for my parents' 40th wedding anniversary trip, a week at a resort that my brother, Grant, had chosen and booked because Grant chose and booked everything. He was the family's designated success story. 37 years old, senior vice president at a private equity firm in Manhattan, the kind of man who said things like deal flow and value creation at Thanksgiving dinner and expected applause. His wife, Tamsin, sat beside him in the lounge wearing a cashmere travel set that cost more than my monthly rent. She was scrolling through her phone with the detached serenity of a woman whose problems were exclusively first world. My parents, Richard and Lily Chen, occupied the adjacent seats. My father was reading the Financial Times. My mother was watching me with that specific parental radar that detected unhappiness even when none existed. My younger sister Amy, a pediatric dentist, was FaceTiming her boyfriend from the corner. 12 family members total, all in first class, all dressed in the casual elegance of people who traveled well and often. Except me. I was in a hoodie and sneakers because I was comfortable, not because I couldn't afford cashmere. But nobody at this gate knew that. What my family didn't know, what I had spent 9 years ensuring they could never discover through any casual observation, was that the woman in the black hoodie managed a private aviation and luxury hospitality empire worth $4.2 billion. That the company I'd built from nothing, Skyline Holdings, owned a fleet of 43 private jets, 14 boutique hotels, 6 luxury resorts, and 3 commercial real estate portfolios spanning 19 countries. That I was, according to a Forbes list published 6 weeks ago that nobody in my family read, the 11th wealthiest self-made woman under 40 in America. And that in approximately 20 minutes, the director of aviation operations for this airport's private terminal was going to walk into this first-class lounge looking for me because my personal aircraft had been serviced and was fueled and ready on the tarmac. Not a first-class seat on a commercial airline, a private jet, one of 43 that I owned. But for now, I was the sister who didn't belong in first class. Grant was still talking. He'd moved from champagne commentary to a broader lecture on the economics of air travel. First class is a mindset, he was explaining to Tamsin, who was clearly not listening, but had learned to nod at strategic intervals. It's about investing in yourself, in your comfort, in the statement you make when you walk onto a plane. He glanced at me. Economy is for people who've accepted limitations.
First class is for people who've transcended them. Tamsin nodded. Strategic interval achieved. My mother, sensing the direction of the conversation, intervened gently. Grant, May is perfectly happy in her seat. I upgraded her because it's a family trip. I'm fine, Mom, I said. Grant raised his hands in mock surrender. I'm not saying anything. I'm just observing that some people invest in their lifestyle and some people... He paused, searching for a diplomatic way to say what he actually meant. Don't, Tamsin supplied helpfully. Grant pointed at her. Exactly. No judgment. I took a sip of water. The lounge's complimentary water. I could have been drinking their most expensive champagne, and it wouldn't have registered in my monthly expenses as anything more than a decimal point. But I liked water. It kept me clear. My phone buzzed, a text from my Chief Operating Officer, James Montague, who was currently at Skyline Holdings Operations Center in Manhattan. Heads up. Director of Private Aviation at JFK is looking for you. Your G650 maintenance was completed early. They need authorization to move it to the departure pad. Also, the Miami resort team confirmed your parents' anniversary suite, presidential level, complimentary, per your instructions. I typed back. Tell the director I'll be at the private terminal in 30 minutes. And make sure the resort doesn't mention my name. The suite is from an anonymous benefactor. He replied, You're sitting in a first-class lounge while your jet waits on the tarmac. The irony is not lost on me. I smiled at my phone. Grant noticed. What's so funny? Nothing, I said. A friend sent me something. He turned back to his champagne. The story of how I built a $4.2 billion aviation and hospitality empire while my family thought I was a struggling travel agent starts with a red-eye flight and a broken seat. At 24, fresh from Cornell's hospitality management program, I was working as a junior coordinator at a mid-sized travel agency in Queens. The pay was modest. The work was repetitive, but I was learning something that most people in the hospitality industry never bothered to understand: the gap. The gap between what wealthy travelers expected and what the industry actually delivered. Private aviation was fragmented, inconsistent, and shockingly outdated. Hotel experiences at the luxury level were cookie cutter. The wealthiest people in the world were paying premium prices for mediocre service because nobody had bothered to build something truly exceptional. I saw the gap the way an architect sees an empty lot, full of possibility, full of structure that didn't exist yet but should. I started Skyline Holdings with $55,000 in savings and a single client. A tech executive who'd been frustrated with every private aviation broker he'd tried. I didn't own a jet. I didn't own anything. What I did was broker a charter for him at 30% below market rate by negotiating directly with aircraft operators and cutting out 3 layers of middlemen. He flew round trip to London for $40,000 less than his usual cost. His experience was flawless. I'd personally coordinated every detail, from the ground transportation to the in-flight catering to the hotel at the other end. He told 2 friends. They told 4. Within a year, I had 40 clients and $3 million in annual revenue from brokerage commissions alone. But brokerage was the beginning,
not the destination. I used the commissions to acquire my first aircraft, a pre-owned Learjet that I bought at auction for $2.1 million, refurbished with borrowed money and put into service at rates that undercut every competitor in the Northeast. It was profitable within 4 months. The second jet followed 6 months later, then a third, then 5 more. By year 4, I owned 12 aircraft and had expanded into luxury hospitality, acquiring a distressed boutique hotel in Aspen that I renovated and relaunched as the first property in what would become Skyline's hotel portfolio. The growth was exponential because the model was simple. Control the entire experience. Don't broker, own. Own the jets, own the hotels, own the ground transportation. Own every touch point between the moment a client decides to travel and the moment they return home. Remove every source of friction, every point of mediocrity. Create something seamless. By year 7, Skyline Holdings had 43 jets, 14 hotels, 6 resorts, and commercial real estate in 19 countries. Revenue was $890 million annually. The company was valued at $4.2 billion in our most recent private assessment. And I'd maintained my anonymity with the same discipline I applied to everything else. Skyline's founder was listed as M. Chen in regulatory filings. No public appearances, no interviews, no society pages. The luxury world knew Skyline as the gold standard. They didn't know it was built by a woman in a black hoodie who let her family buy her economy upgrades to first class. The anonymity served a dual purpose. In the luxury space, mystique is currency. Clients chose Skyline partly because its founder was unknown. The brand felt exclusive, untouchable, above the noise. And personally, the anonymity protected me from my family's particular brand of involvement. Grant would have tried to invest. My father would have offered advice about an industry he knew nothing about. My mother would have told every person she knew. Amy would have wanted free flights. The company would have become a family project, and family projects in the Chen household were always managed by Grant. Everything was managed by Grant. But not this. Not today. 12:47 p.m. The flight was scheduled to board at 1:15. My family was settling into the lounge routine. Grant was on his laptop, probably reviewing deal sheets. Tamsin was napping elegantly. My parents were sharing a scone. Amy was still on FaceTime. And I was watching the lounge entrance, waiting for the moment that would end 9 years of silence. The private aviation director's name was Caroline Voss. I had worked with her for 3 years. She managed the private terminal at JFK and oversaw all VIP aircraft operations. She knew who I was. She knew what I owned. And she texted me 10 minutes ago that she needed to deliver the aircraft readiness confirmation in person because the digital authorization system was down for maintenance. She was coming to the first class commercial lounge to find me in front of my family. I could have prevented it. I could have told her I'd come to the private terminal. I could have handled it by phone. But something about Grant's champagne and his statement about belonging had shifted something inside me. Not anger. Something quieter. Readiness. 12:52 p.m. Through the lounge's glass walls, I saw Caroline approaching. She was in her airline uniform, a crisp navy blazer with the airport's VIP services insignia. She carried a leather portfolio that contained aircraft documentation. She walked with the purposeful stride of a woman whose job involved managing the travel arrangements of billionaires. Grant noticed her first. He always noticed authority figures. He straightened in his chair instinctively, the way men do when someone who outranks them enters a room. Caroline entered the lounge, scanned the room, and found me. She smiled. A professional, warm smile that communicated recognition and respect. She walked directly toward me, passing Grant without acknowledging him. "Miss Chen," she said, "good afternoon. I apologize for the intrusion. Your Gulfstream G650 has completed maintenance ahead of schedule. We have it fueled and positioned at Gate 7 of the private terminal. I just need your authorization to move it to the departure pad." She opened the leather portfolio and placed it on the table in front of me. The top page read, Skyline Holdings, Aircraft Authorization, Owner M. Chen. Aircraft, Gulfstream G650ER. Registration, N-SKY1. Status, ready for departure. The silence around me was absolute. Grant's champagne glass was frozen midair. Tamsin had opened her eyes. My father had set down the Financial Times. My mother's scone was suspended between her hand and her mouth. Amy had ended her FaceTime call without saying goodbye. I signed the authorization. "Thank you, Caroline. We won't be departing until later this evening. Can you have the crew on standby from 6 p.m.? "Of course, Miss Chen. Your usual catering preferences?" She glanced at her portfolio. "The Japanese fusion menu with the 2018 Montrachet?" "That's perfect," I said. "Thank you." She closed the portfolio, nodded respectfully, and turned to leave. Then she paused. "Oh, and the presidential suite at your Miami property has been prepared per your specifications. The staff is expecting your family this evening." My property. The words hung in the lounge like smoke from an expensive cigar. My Miami property. Caroline left. The lounge remained frozen. I picked up my water and took a sip. Grant set down his champagne glass with a click that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. "A Gulfstream G650, he said. His voice was flat, thin, the voice of a man whose entire framework for understanding the world had just been formatted and wiped. "Yes," I said, "yours, mine." He looked at the authorization form still sitting on the table. My name, my company, my aircraft. Skyline Holdings, he said. He knew the name. Everyone in the luxury world knew the name. The jets, the hotels, the resorts. That's you. That's been me for 9 years, I said. My father picked up the authorization form and studied it with the careful attention of a man who'd spent his life reading financial documents. M. Chen, he read. May Chen. He looked at me over his reading glasses. How much? The company was privately valued at $4.2 billion 6 months ago, I said. I'm the sole owner. My mother set down her scone, very slowly, like it had become too heavy to hold. You own a jet, she said. I own 43 jets, I corrected gently, and 14 hotels, and 6 resorts. And the resort where we're staying this week in Miami is one of them. I booked the presidential suite for your anniversary as a gift from the anonymous benefactor you were so touched by. That's me too. My mother burst into tears. Not sad tears, not even happy tears. The kind of tears that happen when your entire understanding of your child undergoes a complete renovation in the span of 60 seconds. Amy, who had the fastest processing speed of anyone in the family, started laughing. "Oh my God," she said. "You own the resort? We're staying at your hotel? And Grant just told you that you don't belong in first class?" She laughed harder. "Because you don't. You belong in a private jet." Grant hadn't moved. His champagne sat untouched. His laptop screen had gone dark. His entire identity, the family's designated success, the man who explained the economics of air travel to people he considered beneath him, was recalibrating against data he couldn't dispute. "You sat in this lounge," he said slowly, "while your private jet was parked on the tarmac 50 yards away." "I did," I confirmed, "drinking complimentary water while you drank champagne and told me I didn't belong here." He closed his eyes. "First class is for people who've transcended limitations," he quoted himself. "That's what I said 20 minutes before your private jet handler arrived." The word transcended had never sounded so small. Tamsin was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen from her. Respect, possibly, or recalculation. Hard to tell with Tamsin. "How?" my father said. The single word contained every question he couldn't formulate. "I built it," I said, "from nothing. $55,000 and one client, 9 years ago, while you all thought I was working at a travel agency." Grant opened his eyes. "The travel agency? That was a cover?" "It was real for the first 6 months," I said. "Then it became a useful explanation that nobody ever questioned because it confirmed what everyone already believed about me." He stood up and walked to the window. Through the glass, the tarmac stretched out in both directions. Somewhere out there among the commercial aircraft sat a Gulfstream G650ER with the Skyline Holdings logo on the tail. His sister's jet. One of 43. "I've spent my entire career in private equity," he said to the window. "I evaluate companies for a living. I assess value. I identify potential." He turned back. "And I missed a $4.2 billion company built by the person sitting next to me at Christmas dinner every year." "You weren't looking," I said. "Because you already decided what you saw. You saw a woman in a hoodie and sneakers, and you calculated her value at 0. That's not assessment, that's assumption. And it's the most expensive mistake you've ever made. Not in money, in time. 9 years of not knowing your sister." He didn't respond. His jaw was working the way it did when he was processing something that didn't fit his models. My mother had stopped crying and was now holding my hand with a grip that suggested she might never let go. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked. "Because of what happened 10 minutes ago," I said. "Grant told me I don't belong in first class. Dad's reading the Financial Times looking for success stories he could be sitting next to. Amy's on FaceTime because this family's dynamics bore her. And you upgraded my ticket out of pity." I looked at each of them. If I told you 9 years ago, Grant would have tried to manage it. Dad would have tried to advise it. Mom, you would have told everyone at church, and it would have stopped being mine and started being ours. I needed it to be mine. My mother's grip tightened. "I'm sorry," she said, "for the pity upgrade." I smiled. "The upgrade was sweet, Mom. It's the pity I could have done without." Amy hugged me from behind. "I want a free flight," she said immediately. Then, "I'm kidding. Kind of. Not really." I laughed. Amy was the only person in this family who had never once made me feel less than. She'd earned her flight. My father folded the Financial Times and set it on the table with a finality that suggested he might never read it the same way again. "May," he said, "I've spent my whole life reading about successful people." He looked at me with eyes that were red and bright and honest. I should have been reading about my daughter. We boarded the commercial first-class flight to Miami at 1:15 p.m., all 12 of us. Grant was quiet the entire flight, not sulking, processing. Tamsin asked me 3 questions about the hotel industry that were surprisingly intelligent. Amy fell asleep on my shoulder. My parents held hands and didn't speak, which was their version of deep emotional processing. When we landed in Miami, a black SUV was waiting on the tarmac. Not at the terminal, on the tarmac. The driver held a sign that read, "Ms. Chen, Skyline Holdings." My mother gasped. Grant stared. I walked toward it. The driver opened the door. "Welcome home, Ms. Chen," he said. It's a phrase I heard a dozen times a day at my properties around the world. But this time, with my family watching, it meant something different. It meant the hiding was over. The resort was everything I designed it to be. My parents' presidential suite overlooked the ocean. Fresh flowers, personalized welcome letters, their favorite wine chilled and waiting. The staff addressed me by name as we walked through the lobby. The general manager appeared and shook my hand. "Ms. Chen, it's wonderful to have you and your family with us. Everything is prepared as you requested." My mother walked through the lobby, touching surfaces like she was verifying their reality. "My daughter built this," she whispered to the front desk agent, who smiled and said, "Yes, ma'am. She built all of it." That night at the anniversary dinner I'd arranged on the hotel's private beach, my father stood to give a toast. 40 years ago, I married the woman who changed my life," he said, holding my mother's hand. "Tonight, I want to acknowledge the woman who changed how I see the world." He looked at me. "May, you built something extraordinary. Not just the company, the lesson. You taught me that the person I was proudest of wasn't always the one I should have been watching. And the person I worried about most was the one who needed my worry least." He raised his glass. "To the woman who doesn't belong in first class, because she belongs in her own jet." Everyone drank. Grant raised his glass last. His eyes met mine across the candlelit table, and in them, I saw something I'd been waiting 9 years to see. Not envy, not competition. Understanding. He stood up. "I owe my sister an apology that's bigger than a toast," he said. "But I'll start with this." He looked at me directly. "You don't belong in first class. You were right about that, May. I was wrong about why." The laughter that followed was warm and real and tasted like salt air and possibility. The week in Miami was transformative, not just for the family dynamic, but for each person individually. Grant spent 3 days shadowing the resort's general manager, asking questions about operations, staffing,
revenue models. His private equity brain was fascinated by the business. But more than that, he was fascinated by the philosophy. On the fourth day, he found me by the pool with my laptop, reviewing fleet maintenance schedules. "Can I ask you something?" he said, sitting in the lounge chair beside me. "You've been asking me things for 3 days. One more won't hurt." "When did you stop being angry at me?" I closed the laptop. "Who says I stopped?" He looked stricken. "I'm kidding," I said. "Mostly. I stopped being angry about 5 years ago. Anger is expensive. It takes energy I'd rather spend on building." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about what you said, about assumption versus assessment. I built my career on evaluating companies, finding hidden value, and I walked past the most valuable person in my life every Christmas without seeing her. That's not a professional failure, Grant. It's a personal one." "You're right," I said, "but you're here now, and the view is pretty good from this side." He smiled. For the first time in my adult memory, it wasn't performative. It was just his face, being honest. Amy used the week to interview every department head at the resort. She took notes in a journal she'd bought at the gift shop. By the end of the trip, she'd written a 30-page analysis of Skyline's hospitality model and presented it to me over breakfast on the last morning. It was better than half the consulting reports I'd paid for. I offered her a job. She said she'd think about it. 3 months later, she joined Skyline as Director of Guest Experience. She was spectacular at it. Turns out, understanding children's teeth gives you excellent insight into managing adults' expectations. Both populations are anxious, easily frustrated, and respond well to patience and clear communication. My father started reading about aviation, not casually, with the systematic intensity of an engineer learning a new field. He called me every week with questions about jet acquisition economics, maintenance cost structures, and fleet utilization rates. He built a spreadsheet comparing Skyline's operational efficiency to publicly traded aviation companies. We outperformed all of them. He sent me the spreadsheet with a single note. "Your grandmother would have built the same thing. She just didn't have the tools." My mother became the unofficial ambassador for the resort. She told everyone. Church friends, neighbors, the mailman, the woman who cut her hair. "My daughter owns this," she'd say, showing photos on her phone to anyone within arm's reach. It was embarrassing and wonderful, and exactly what mothers do when they finally have something to brag about. The Forbes profile ran 8 weeks after our Miami trip. The headline called me the invisible mogul of luxury travel. The water was warm. The stars were absurd. "That hoodie you wore at the airport," she said, "you own a $4.2 billion company and you wear a hoodie to travel?" "Comfort over performance," I said. She linked her arm through mine. "Your grandmother used to say something like that. She said the richest people she knew were the ones who didn't need you to know they were rich." I stopped walking. "Grandma said that?" "Every time your grandfather bought a new car, she'd say it." She squeezed my arm. "I think she'd understand exactly why you kept quiet. And I think she'd be proud that you finally let us in." We walked in silence for a while, 2 women on a beach that one of them owned, watching waves that didn't care about net worth or first-class lounges or brothers with champagne opinions. Sometimes the person who doesn't belong in first class is the person who outgrew it years ago. Sometimes the hoodie is more honest than the cashmere, and sometimes The most powerful thing you can do in a room full of people who've underestimated you is sit quietly, drink your water, and wait for the director of aviation to walk in and call you by name. Not because you need the recognition, but because the people who love you deserve to see who you really are, even if it takes a Gulf Stream to get their attention.